All right, everyone, stop exactly what you're doing. Consider this a Code Ninja security advisory. Look, if you're running on-premises Microsoft SharePoint servers right now and you haven't deployed the absolute latest emergency patches, you need to operate under the assumption that your perimeter is already breached. Seriously, we're tracking an active, chained exploitation of critical vulnerabilities, and the endpoint of this chain? It's a fully functional public exploit that is actively deploying persistent malware as we speak. I'm your host, your senior white hat threat analyst, and in this explainer, we're going to break down the exact step-by-step mechanics of this compromise so you can lock down your infrastructure immediately. So let's just get right to it, starting with this number, 9.8. That is the critical CVSS severity score slapped onto CVE 2026-56-164 by the National Vulnerability Database. And what makes a 9.8 so absolutely terrifying for us network defenders? Well, it's a zero-day flaw that hands over unauthenticated elevation of privilege. Let me translate that. The attacker needs zero prior access, zero credentials, and literally zero user interaction to take total dominance over your entire SharePoint environment. It is the ultimate worst-case scenario. To get you up to speed fast, here's the protocol for today. We'll cover the zero-day itself, run a quick comms check, define the blast radius, tear apart the attack mechanisms, review emergency patching directives, and finally, touch on coordinated vulnerability disclosure. Starting with Section 1, the zero-day perimeter breached. Here's the harsh reality, folks. The time for phased patching, scheduling that comfortable maintenance window for next weekend, that is completely over. Right now, fully functional, unauthenticated public exploits for this are just sitting there, live on GitHub. The weapon is already out there in the wild. And this wasn't just some overnight anomaly. No, this was a prolonged, methodical siege. It all kicked off back on April 14th when a spoofing vulnerability, CVE 2026-32201, hit CISA's known exploited vulnerabilities catalog. Then, by July 1st, attackers started chaining that with a remote code execution flaw, CVE 2026-45659. Then, boom, July 14th drops the bombshell, the disclosure of our 9.8 elevation of privilege flaw, which actually prompted CISA to issue an incredibly rare extreme 72-hour remediation mandate. And literally the very next day, on July 15th, Microsoft confirmed yet another flaw in this chain was being actively exploited in the wild. The escalation here is just off the charts. Moving to Section 2. Comms check, establish secure link. We're going to pause tactically right here for a second just to establish a secure intelligence feed between us. Look, in our line of work, rapid info sharing is literally the difference between a secure network and waking up to a massive ransomware event. So I need an ACK, an acknowledgement, that this transmission is coming through loud and clear. Just hit like on this explainer as your formal receipt of this intel. Also, subscribing to @cybertech79 and enabling notifications, consider that a strict security necessity. When 0 days drop like this channel is your real-time threat feed. Go ahead and secure that link right now. All right, Section 3, blast radius. Who is exposed? So who exactly is sitting in the crosshairs of this exploit chain? We need to identify the exposed targets immediately. The crucial takeaway here is that this hits all supported on-premises deployments. If you've got Microsoft SharePoint Enterprise Server 2016, SharePoint Server 2019, or the SharePoint Server Subscription Edition racking up uptime in your server room, you are squarely in the blast radius. If those servers are exposed and unpatched, you are wide open to total farm administrator dominance. I mean, the threat actor can effectively own the entire farm, lock, stock, and barrel. Let's look at Section 4, attack mechanics, the exploit chain. To properly defend the network, we have to tear apart the actual weapons the adversaries are chaining together to punch through your perimeter. What we're observing in the wild is a very specific 3-step attack protocol. Step 1, they use that spoofing vulnerability to silently bypass initial perimeter defenses. No user interaction required whatsoever. Step 2, once they're knocking on the door, they establish execution using deserialization of untrusted data flaws to run arbitrary code. And finally, Step 3, the absolute linchpin of this whole campaign. They trigger that nasty CVE 2026-56164 to automatically escalate their privileges straight to the top. But how does a 9.8 elevation of privilege actually function under the hood? Well, it essentially boils down to CWE 306, which is missing authentication for a critical function. Basically, there's some seriously insufficient validation going on in the SharePoint user profile endpoints. Attackers bypass the entire authentication gate by doing something remarkably simple. They deliberately omit the X request digest header inside crafted SOAP payloads, and they fire those straight at the client.svc endpoint. It's a highly precise surgical manipulation of network traffic, and it works like a charm.
And guys, the post-exploitation behavior, it is just devastating. The second that payload executes, we're seeing an automated jump from basically anonymous access directly up to site collection administrator or farm admin. Boom, just like that. From there, they immediately scrape your IIS machine keys. And that's critical because with those keys in hand, they can forge any future requests they want to maintain deep access. They spin up persistent backdoor domain users, they completely dump your admin lists, and the grand finale? They deploy their custom persistent malware, which Microsoft Defender tracks as LeakFang. It's a complete takeover.
Section 5. Emergency patching. Deploy immediately. Listen up, because these are your mandatory remediation orders. And hear me out on this. Simple patching is no longer going to cut it if your environment was exposed to the open internet during this vulnerability window. First things first, as a sysadmin, you need to verify that your systems meet or exceed these exact vendor build numbers right now. For SharePoint 2016, you got to be on build 16.0.5561.1001. For 2019, you're aiming for 16.0.10417.20175. And if you're on the subscription edition, you must hit 16.0.19725.20434. Literally, the second this explainer ends, go check your builds.
But like I just said, if you were exposed, updating that build number, that's just step one. CISA has dropped some incredibly strict hardening directives here. You've got to enable AMSI, that's the anti-malware scan interface, on your SharePoint and IIS worker processes. You also need to set the request body scan mode to full so you can actually catch those malicious post payloads coming in. Now, pay attention to this part, because it's absolutely crucial. You must conduct a full forensic triage to hunt down any web shells or key harvesting artifacts. Because the attackers stole those IIS machine keys, you have to rotate them. But, and this is a massive but, if you rotate those keys before you scrub the LeakFang web shells out of your system, the rotation does absolutely nothing to secure the environment. The attacker's just going to steal your shiny new keys. Scrub the system first, then rotate. And please restrict all external access to your SharePoint central administration.
Section 6. Coordinated vulnerability disclosure. Now, I want to take a second to ground this explainer in the core operational standards of our profession, just to explain exactly why we're discussing these exploit mechanics so aggressively and openly. Look, as a security researcher, I fully stand by the principle that coordinated, highly actionable disclosure isn't just nice to have, it's a sheer necessity. The time for phased patching is absolutely over. When threat actors are out there actively burning a CVSS 9.8 flaw, and there's a functional, unauthenticated exploit just sitting on GitHub for literally anyone to download, holding this info back only hurts you, the defenders. You need to know the brutal facts. You need to know the exact endpoints being hit, the specific headers they're manipulating, and the exact malware being dropped, because that is the only way you can adequately protect and triage your own systems. Make no mistake, coordinated disclosure forces vendors to act, and it forces organizations to actually patch. Which brings us to our final, frankly, chilling question. I want you to take a hard look at your architecture right now. Is your perimeter genuinely secure, or is LeakFang already inside, just quietly hiding behind a forged IS machine key? Take these mitigation steps seriously, verify your builds, and hunt down those indicators of compromise. Stay vigilant out there, and most importantly, stay secure.